A massive change to the U.S. immigration system was literally hours away from becoming law. But then, at the 11th hour, a federal judge slammed on the brakes, bringing the whole thing to a grinding halt. This was a really dramatic last-minute decision that stopped a plan to fast-track deportations in its tracks. So let's get into what actually happened.
But first, I want you to just picture this. Imagine you get a deportation order, a decision that will change your entire life. And then you're told you have just 10 days. Not 10 days to find a lawyer, not 10 days to prepare, 10 days total to challenge it. That's the incredibly high-stakes situation at the very heart of this new rule.
So let's dive right into our first section, a rule halted overnight. This is the story of how a federal judge stepped in when the clock was just about to strike midnight. Okay, so the date is Sunday, March 8th, 2026. A federal court in Washington, D.C. issues a ruling that stops a new government rule dead in its tracks. We're talking just hours, literally hours, before it was supposed to take effect. This rule was set to completely overhaul the immigration appeals process, and it got stopped on the very eve of its launch. And you've got to see how fast this all went down. On February 6th, the government publishes this fast-track rule. Just a few weeks later, immigrant rights groups race to file a lawsuit. And it all comes to a head on March 8th, when Judge Moss issues his ruling, blocking the rule just one single night before it was supposed to become law. You really can't get any closer to the deadline than that. So, what was in this rule that made it so controversial? What was the big deal? Let's get into what this fast-track appeal plan would have actually meant for people in the system. To really get it, you first have to know about something called the Board of Immigration Appeals, or the BIA. Just think of it as the highest court inside the immigration system. If you're a non-citizen and a judge orders you deported, the BIA is often your last chance, your absolute last safety net to argue your case. And the changes being proposed were, well, they were drastic. Let's just compare the old way with the new plan. The deadline to file an appeal? Slashed from 30 days down to just 10. Instead of your case being automatically considered, it would be automatically dismissed unless the board voted to hear it. And here's the real kicker. Any legal argument you didn't raise in that initial 10-day window was gone forever. Forfeited. The difference between the two is just night and day.
So you're probably asking why? Why such a huge change? Well, the administration's official reason was all about efficiency. They pointed to a massive backlog of cases clogging up the system and basically said these new, faster procedures were the only way to clear it out and speed up deportations.
Okay, so that brings us to the legal fight itself. How did a rule like this actually get stopped? Let's unpack the judge's decision and see exactly how this legal challenge pulled off a win. The entire case really boils down to this one law, the Administrative Procedure Act, or APA. You can just think of it as the government's rulebook. A key part of it says that federal agencies have to let the public know about major new rules and give them a chance to comment before they're enacted. You can't just wake up one day and change the whole system without telling anyone. And this lawsuit wasn't just one organization. It was a whole coalition of immigrant rights groups that came together to fight this. You had the American Immigration Council, HIAS, the National Immigrant Justice Center, and others all joining forces to challenge the rule. So here's how Judge Moss broke it down. His reasoning had three main parts. First, no public input. The government claimed there was good cause to skip that public comment period, but the judge just wasn't buying it. Second, he said the rule created a system of profound unfairness, arguing it was basically designed to make sure most appeals never got a meaningful look. And that led to his final point. Because the government didn't follow its one rulebook, the new plan violated the APA and was therefore unlawful. Simple as that. So the rule is officially blocked. Great, but what happens now? Let's jump into our final section, a system in the balance, and see how people reacted and what the future might hold. For the groups who filed the lawsuit, this ruling was a huge win. They celebrated it not just as a victory for immigrants, but as a victory for the basic ideas of fairness, due process, and the rule of law itself. And this quote from them really says it all. They believe the rule was an attempt to, in their words, eviscerate non-citizens' right to appeal. So for them, this court ruling was an absolutely critical defense of due process. Now, on the other side, supporters of the administration saw things very differently. They didn't see this as a win for the rule of law. They saw it as a classic case of judicial activism, with a judge overstepping to block the executive branch from doing its job.
They framed the decision as judicial overreach by an Obama-appointed jurist and argued that it was just obstructing the administration's key priorities on border security.
So where does this all leave us? Well, for now, the old system is still in place. That 30-day appeal window is safe. But you have to understand, this ruling is really just a pause. It's not the final word. The massive legal and political fight over what the immigration system should look like, yeah, that is far from over.
And this whole thing really leaves us with a huge, fundamental question. On one hand, you have the government's push for efficiency, to clear backlogs and speed things up. On the other, you have the courts stepping in to protect fairness and due process. It really makes you wonder, when people's entire lives are on the line, where do you draw that line between efficiency and justice?